Subahibi is a game known by many names. Wonderful Everyday or Subahibi for short. Some call it the greatest visual novel of all time. It is, to say the least, a very interesting adventure through many twists, turns, desks, flashbacks, sewers, and end skies. The long stretch from Down the Rabbit Hole 2 all the way until Jabberwocky 2 leads you through an experience that you literally could not find anywhere else. It's a game that has caused much discussion around it, from its themes to the mysteries found inside the game and even omitted answers. It has engaged the minds of many. There is, however, one specific section of the game that doesn't really have one consensus on what it could mean. That part of the game is the very first chapter, disconnected from the rest of the story, Down the Rabbit Hole 1. Down the Rabbit Hole 1 is by far the most puzzling piece in Subahibi's puzzle, but also one of the most interesting. So, I decided that I wanted to go back to the chapter, almost 2 years after I finished the game for the first time, and see what I could derive from it. But first I'm going to need to read some books. So we actually can't just dive straight into the chapter. If you played Subahibi, you would know that it likes to reference a ton of other works throughout the novel. Even starting in the first chapter, there's an extended sequence that references an entirely different work, and I really had no idea how to interpret that on a first read-through. Of course, some say that you should read a lot of works before even starting the novel itself, but I was too lazy for that. Hell, I was almost even too lazy to read them now, but that doesn't make for a good video. The works that I decided to read before jumping down the rabbit hole were Night on the Galactic Railroad by Kenji Miyazawa, Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus by Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Tsui no Sora remake by Tsukasa. 3 of those are connected to Subahibi because in some way, shape, or form, the author implemented aspects from them into the novel. That author being Tsukasa. And like I just said, I also decided to read Tsui no Sora remake. Tsui no Sora remake is a bit of a strange work. It is its own project, yes, but it's also very similar to the first few chapters of Subahibi, mainly because it covers a lot of the same plot points as the chapters predating Jabberwocky 1. And being a remake, the original work actually predates Subahibi itself. Subahibi started as a remake of Tsui no Sora, and eventually spiraled into its own work, so Tsui no Sora was born to be a genuine remake, but also sort of evolved into its own thing. I'll bring up aspects of these works as they come up in the chapter, and I'll link my notes on everything in the description because, yes, I did take notes. A lot of them. So, without further ado, let's jump into the rabbit hole, and there will be spoilers for everything that I've mentioned ahead. Down the Rabbit Hole starts with our main character, Yuki, smoking on a rooftop. It's like the most iconic scene in the game and one of the most important too. If not just because it lets Yuki aura farm to her heart's content, but to what, or rather who, it brings up as the scene comes to a close. And that person is Mamiya Takuji, the greatest person in existence, the savior, a name that strikes joy into the hearts of all around the world. His appearance here is more of a teaser of what's to come, but it's also fairly important. I mean, just look at him. After that encounter, Yuki leaves the rooftop and goes on the train, pondering about her own age, the age of some random old guy who is catching crazy ashtrays, and finally you come to a choice. Yuki can either do what she is meant to do, or she can go for a walk. Choosing to go on a walk is what leads into Down the Rabbit Hole, while doing what she is meant to do leads you to Down the Rabbit Hole 2. But this choice only appears after you've completed Down the Rabbit Hole for the first time. Before we get into the chapter, I need to explain how I'm gonna go about this. I don't intend to tackle the chapter scene by scene. Instead, I'm going to structure this just as the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus is structured. The Tractatus is composed of 7 different propositions. The world is everything that is the case. What is the case, the fact, is the existence of atomic facts. The logical picture of the facts is the thought. The thought is the significant proposition. Propositions are truth functions of elementary propositions. An elementary proposition is a truth function of itself. The general form of truth function is whatever that is. This is the general form of proposition. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Each proposition then expands into subcategories such as 1.01, 1.1, 1.21, and so on. I have 7 propositions for various mysteries in the chapter, and my answers for all of them. I will elaborate on them using both my own reasoning and what I've picked up from my reading. With that being said, let's get into Proposition 1. 1. The wonderful everyday is both Yuki and Zakuro's perspectives. 1.1. Zakuro falling on Yuki causes their worlds to merge. The moment that changes the story being whether or not Yuki catches a Zakuro to the face or not is, in my eyes, just the moment whether Yuki becomes able to see Zakuro's viewpoint or not. Forgive me since now I'll have to explain what any of that even begins to mean, and I'm like 19, and I read the Tractatus once, and I wrote my notes, but I don't have like a very in-depth understanding, but I believe that what I discerned from it is enough for what I'm trying to say here, so just chill on me. But essentially, if you remember, Proposition 1 of the Tractatus states that the world is everything that is the case, and then it further elaborates that the world is the totality of facts, not things, and the world divides into facts. Basically, the world isn't made up of dirt, water, air, lollipops, Jolly Ranchers, all that good stuff, but instead, the facts that lead a person to the conclusion of said things. There can be facts that are true, and there can be facts that are false. For example, take the proposition, there is a cockroach on my wall. That may or may not be true at the current moment, but since it is logically possible, it could be categorized as a false fact. Things like this exist in something called logical space. My belief is that when Zakuro fell onto Yuki, somehow their worlds literally collided and they began to share a world, where Zakuro was able to perceive the world as Yuki did, and Yuki was able to perceive the world as Zakuro did. This is important because, due to the existence of true and false facts, there could hypothetically be someone who sees the world in entirely false facts. This would be possible because all of the information they perceive is logically possible, yet it's so vastly different from a world where someone only sees true facts that their worlds could essentially be entirely different. So take a fact where Zakuro Takashima is alive on July 13th. That would be a false fact, but it exists in logical space, so someone would be able to perceive that. Due to the worlds merging, basically, Yuki never has a chance to perceive otherwise, and Zakuro, now in whatever the hell this afterlife seems to be, is sharing her perception of the world with Yuki as well, and thus you get the wonderful everyday. 1.11. Zakuro's world is a passage to the afterlife. I mean, this one is pretty obvious, but I just want to more specifically elaborate. Basically, Zakuro is traveling to the end of her road, which is made obvious by the end of DTRH-1, the Milky Way Railway. In the original story, Not on the Galactic Railroad, we follow the characters Giovanni and Campanella as they explore the galaxy on the railway. They talk to many people and see many sights, but most importantly is a moment where the conductor asks Giovanni for his ticket, and specifically notes that it is 3-dimensional, just as Yuki's ticket is in the story. That specifically is the signifier of life and death for a passenger on the railway, as Campanella does not have such a ticket, and it is revealed that he died. He died back in the real world, just as Zakuro did in the main story. I would also like to point out that there is a real chance that Zakuro is interacting with the real world. In Alice in Wonderland, following the rabbit is what leads her to Wonderland, and Zakuro drops rabbits from rooftops multiple times in the chapter, for like no reason. Until you realize, wait. July 12th, 2012, 10:44 p.m. Zakuro Takashima sends a message to 158 people on her phone. July 16th, 2012, 5:58 p.m. Zakuro Takashima drops a rabbit off the rooftop of Building C. 2. Ayana represents the Tractatus. 2.1. Ayana is a state of affairs. Now, this just gets complicated. Obviously, everyone has their questions on what Otonashi Ayana even is. I know I was confused, especially when Chapter 3 just kept sending me curveball after curveball, and then I started hallucinating it alongside Takuji, which was not fun. It was in Tsui no Sora too, just not enjoyable. My view is that she is something called a state of affairs from the Tractatus. A state of affairs is the most basic type of fact. It is a fact that has no bearing on another fact being true or false. It simply is a matter of fact, which is ironic, but basically what it means. Ayana is Ayana. It doesn't matter who views her, whether it be Yuki, Zakuro, Tomosane, Hasaki, or Takuji. It doesn't matter in the slightest, because they all see her the same way. And the differences between their worlds doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Takuji's having a schizo episode. Ayana is Ayana. 2.2. Ayana can manipulate facts. The visual representation of a fact in the Tractatus is a picture. A combination of different objects and various truths and falsehoods come together in order to represent said facts in pictures. I think the reason why Ayana is seemingly able to project images, basically teleport, and read minds is because she has the ability to manipulate facts, and therefore she can manipulate pictures. In Tsui no Sora remake, there is a particular scene. I'm not gonna explain it. It should be obvious, but it's a scene where a man explains what he thinks he is seeing after seeing her in action. And he calls her by the name Nyarlathotep. That was bad. The Crawling Chaos. I know nothing about that, but I do know that they are intended to be a being outside of reality, which is definitely not what Ayana is, actually. I don't think so. Ayana is very much in the bounds of reality, as long as your reality is in line with what the Tractatus describes as reality. Facts can be thought of, and to be a fact, you need to exist in logical space. Nothing that goes on with Ayana, whether it be what we see regarding her or what she does or even what she says, is incomprehensible. It honestly feels like it borders on it sometimes, but they are all things that exist in logical space. If she were truly not of this world, not a single character would be able to comprehend her existence. 3. Hasaki is the girl of the sky. 3.1. Reaching Hasaki is the story's main goal. So, there's a concept that Zakuro brings up called the girl of the world and the girl of the sky. We learn by the end that Yuki is the girl of the world because the wonderful everyday is her world. It's in line with what the Tractatus has to say about people's perspective and being the limits of their own world. Considering my view on Zakuro essentially being the other piece that makes this world a possibility, you would expect her to be the girl of the sky, which is what I thought when I first played it. But no, I think it's fairly obvious that the girl of the sky is intended to reference Hasaki, Mamiya Takuji's little sister, and he just cannot perceive her at all. We see this. What he sees is Kagami and Tsukasa, which is a can of worms I'll dive into later, but essentially he just cannot see her at all. In the story, neither can this version of Yuki, since Takuji made her to replace the other, more aware version of Yuki. He's of course not doing this consciously, but it still happens. Getting back to the normal world is necessary because Yuki needs to reach the girl of the sky, but more accurately, Tomosane, the other personality in Yuki and Takuji's threesome, needs to. It's literally the point of the story, as Tomosane has to realize that he's actually the main personality and Takuji needs to get the boot ASAP, and that's how the story ends regardless of which ending you get. The point of leaving the wonderful everyday is so that the girl of the world can return to the girl of the sky, but the girl of the world isn't actually a girl at all, it's a guy who got soloed by the savior on a rooftop. 4. Kagami and Tsukasa are Hasaki's emotions. 4.01. Neither are actually Hasaki and DTRH1. This is fairly self-explanatory, but Hasaki doesn't get caught up in Zakuro's suicide, so it can't be her. Instead, this just happens because Kagami and Tsukasa's existence are integral to this version of Yuki's existence, since she is meant to be remolded by Takuji. 4.1. Kagami is the desire to be a lover. Kagami is meant to be the representation of Hasaki's love for Tomosane. When Zakuro, Kagami, and Tsukasa all decide to live at Yuki's house, they all decide to take on roles. Zakuro is the maid, Kagami is the childhood friend, and Tsukasa is the little sister. Tsukasa's role is self-explanatory, but Kagami is specifically the childhood friend, because Hasaki wishes there was no taboo around being in love with her brother. And she cannot reconcile those sides of herself, which inevitably leads to the split of the two. 4.2. Tsukasa is the desire to be a sister. Despite Hasaki wanting to have a romantic relationship with her brother, she also does not entirely want to be disconnected from him as a sister. Of course, again, she cannot reconcile these two sides of herself, so they are split. However, I think it is interesting to note that you can still end up on Tsukasa's route despite this, which she freaks out about, and is likely because she is feeling internal validation. 5. Takuji is also influencing the wonderful everyday. 5.1. Kagami and Tsukasa's existence imply this. Kagami and Tsukasa were originally a part of Takuji's world, and only became a part of Yuki's world when he created a new Yuki to replace the old one. Their existence means that he still has some influence on this world. 5.2. Down the Rabbit Hole 1 having only women is Zakuro and Takuji's influence. The world of Down the Rabbit Hole 1 is a composition of the viewpoints of both Zakuro and Yuki, but outside of that, Takuji should also have some sort of influence on the world, considering he has the most influence out of the three at the time that Zakuro falls on top of Yuki. This can be seen by the fact that the internal world only has women. A large part of that should be Zakuro, of course, since I imagine that a world without men would quite literally be her dream come true. That might be confusing a little bit, considering her main bullies were women, but it was also only ever women, specifically Kimika and Yukiji, that were ever nice to her. However, it is not just Zakuro, but Takuji's influence as well. Specifically, Kagami and Tsukasa's existence, on top of him only ever getting really bullied by men, and his obsession with women in the first place, are part of the reason why Yuki can Yuri to her heart's content in this world. 6. The spirit room is the remains of Tsui no Sora. 6.1. The world ends in Numi no Se 2. Unlike the endings of Subahibi, where the world clearly continues on after Takuji, my goat and savior obviously and very clearly saves everybody with no complications. Tsui no Sora is vastly different. Yes, Yukito still perceives the world after the 20th. However, it is extremely isolated, and just like the ending of Down the Rabbit Hole 1, there is nobody else in the world except for one other person, Ayana. And remember, Ayana is a state of affairs, so she should exist, but it also implies that this is the end of the line for the world of Tsui no Sora. The spirit room travels through multiple locations on the date of July 20th, 1999, and I think that this is a view into what the rest of the world looks like in Tsui no Sora after that date, as the world literally came to an end and everyone stopped existing. This is why there is nobody there and Yuki feels like a ghost. And wait, a ghost? She brings up that phrasing again at the end of Down the Rabbit Hole 1, where she states it is time she stops acting as one and she journeys into Down the Rabbit Hole 2. That same phrasing is specifically why I think the spirit room is just a snapshot of Tsui no Sora's empty, uninhabited world. The use of the same phrasing shows that it is essentially the same thing. Everybody being gone in Down the Rabbit Hole 1's ending, and everybody being gone in Numi no Se 2 are the same thing, and the world ends on July 20th in Down the Rabbit Hole 1 because Yuki goes back. 6.11. The final abode is a red herring. There is a fairly well-known theory about Ayana being a schizophrenic who dreams up all the characters, and that allows the story to infinitely loop until Somosane chooses a correct ending. A good amount of that theory comes from a take on the spirit room of it being part of an outer plane of existence where Ayana lies, but I think I can disregard this given the fact that I explained Ayana has to exist in their plane of existence, otherwise they wouldn't be able to comprehend her at all. The final abode especially is definitely read into too much. Maybe because it's a hospital room, I don't know. It is at best directly aligning with what Yuki says about the spirit rooms, leading you to ponder on the end of someone's life, or what is honestly far more likely is just a red herring. Just something put in to essentially further add to the confusion regarding the spirit room, or it's just Tomosane's repressed memories, considering Takuji should have some influence on this world, in my opinion. 7. The end sky is incomprehensible. Down the Rabbit Hole 1 is definitely the most mysterious part of Subahibi, but I feel like with a reread and some research into the works that inspired Takaji when he wrote the story, you could begin to understand a lot of the intentions with his work. Going back to the Tractatus for a moment here, I actually found myself intrigued and somewhat convinced by what Wittgenstein laid out in the work, specifically the focus on the complexities of language. You cannot assume to understand what someone says outright, especially if every human shares a different world. Ethics and morality especially depend on the majority of people being able to parse the viewpoints of others that align with their own. For that reason, what's explored in Subahibi is something special. The varying viewpoints in the rest of the game show that to an absurd degree. Everyone knows the experience of reading Chapter 3 for the first time, and it's such a wildly different experience from Chapter 4 right afterwards that I am inclined to believe that Takaji definitely intentionally structured it that way. There is a quote at the end of the Tractatus from section 6.43. The world of the happy is quite another than that of the unhappy. I feel like that represents what those chapters intended to do perfectly. Yet, going from chapter 4, which is a really isolated and depressing viewpoint, into chapter 1 again is something really special, since all the other chapters are isolated viewpoints. It is the only viewpoint where I believe that there is a true understanding between the two main characters, where they can perceive the world in the same way. There are many unhappy people. Takuji is unhappy. Hasaki is unhappy. Zakuro is unhappy. But Zakuro, she gets to see the world the way that Yuki sees it, and it's a silver lining that not many people notice starting out. This was probably my most ambitious and definitely most research heavy video to date. If it's on time, then happy End Sky Day. If not, then oh yeah, whatever, bro. Well, like and subscribe for more, and hopefully I'll see you next time.